Hey guys, this is Manga here with a new video on how to practice. To keep this video entertaining, I am literally going to be practicing in front of you, studying actual anatomy and seeing how, it all works together and applying it to my artwork. So just to keep the video visually pleasing. I've given similar videos to this, videos on how to improve your work, videos on how to develop your style or define your style, and I highly recommend you check them out. But this video is going to go pretty brief, nothing too complicated or too long. They'll go straight to the point on what I consider tips that would help you in your, your journey practicing. I can only speak for myself, so most of these are just things that I feel worked for me, and hopefully you can apply that to yourselves and come up with some success. One thing to keep in mind is that some of these ideas overlap with each other, so some of these tips kind of overlap. So there will be things similar with tip 1 and tip 8. You know what I mean? So let's get into it. First thing I want to say is for you to diversify your mind in the way, try to learn new ideas, try to learn new tools, new software, and things like that. And even though you're not familiar with it, you don't know if you'll be comfortable with it. It's kind of like jumping in, eyes closed and experimenting in a way, and just seeing what happens. And you don't know if you like it or not. And in some cases you do. And the tool or software or idea would be your best friend, and it'll kind of be heavily associated with you and your style moving forward. So for instance, early on I didn't use the G pen as much. I always use Sakura Micron inking pens when inking my pencils, and after a while I picked up the G pen and I started practicing with it. And by practicing in this case, I mean actually working on it and until I got comfortable enough to do my actual pages with them and produce my work. So Apple Black Volume 1 is, for the most part, especially when inking the characters on the pages, is done with the G pen. So think of practicing like practicing anything else. So for example, it'll be like playing a video game, and say you're playing a game like FIFA for the first time. You're probably not going to be that good at it, and then you be slow pushing in the buttons and things like that. But as you play the game over and over and over again, you get really comfortable, you gain some confidence, and you start doing things quickly. You start knowing the spots where you can score or not, because you've done some experimenting here and there. You know what works and you know what doesn't. You learn how to defend and attack and do whatever you want to do. You just overall become more comfortable with the game because you've practiced, and sometimes that practicing is just you playing the game over and over and over. Sometimes you're playing the game and analyzing your errors and trying to fix them specifically. So you're like practicing with a purpose. And all these things can be applied to actual art. You start, when you play the game, you start with an easy difficulty, and over time that becomes too easy, and you level up until you reach the hardest difficulty. Just like any game, you also notice your speed increases. So it's all part of the trade. It's the same way you learn ideas, tools, softwares, and you get comfortable with that. You see what works, you see what doesn't. You apply that to your style. You don't apply things you don't like to your style, and you move forward. You learn from books, articles, videos, YouTube videos. There's some books I can recommend. There's a book by Scott McCloud called Understanding Comics, and I think that's a huge recommendation for me if you want to create comic books. Whether it's manga or not, it's still the same. They're still the same thing at its core. I know I've kind of mentioned that before. Try to learn as much as possible. Try to understand why, artist A has their work so clean and yours looks like, it came from the trash to you. Like, I'm not saying for you, telling you to hate your art or lose confidence. It's more to accept it, understand what the problem is, be honest with yourself and fix it, and not try to conform to another person's style. I mean, fix it to where you're happy with your art, but fix it. Second tip will be to watch drawing, like I said, watch drawing videos. I said these things will overlap, but it's not just watching the videos. It's also studying the videos, studying the artist that's drawing, study other comic books that you like, study other art that you like, because this is not just comics. This applies to everything. Using comics as an example would be when I read comics nowadays, but when I do, I'm kind of critically reading it and trying to understand why the artist made certain decisions, and try to see if that I can apply that to my own to my own work. That also includes watching films and doing the same thing and seeing how that can translate into comics. So there's a sense of experiments going on in that. Tip 3 would be to draw every day. And when you do this, you kind of learn about yourself, you learn about your skill, and you find out what your abilities are, you find out what your limits are, you realize what you're good at and what you're not so good at. Again, one of the key things to these tips is you being honest with yourself, right? So if you think you're the boss greatest artist, then this is not going to work. But so it's like you looking at your work and you're drawing every day, and you're like picking your flaws, realizing things you do great, you do well, and moving forward and with the purpose to fix those things, because it helps you moving forward. It kind of gives your drawing a purpose. The drawing that you see behind you is when there was a time where I drew bodies and I drew muscles, and I kind of didn't know exactly how the muscles looked in a certain area, and then I just focused on that, looked at the real human anatomy and try to replicate that. And sometimes you might not want the for me, having a somewhat of a style already, I'm not looking to draw it exactly, even though drawing it exactly is a way of practicing, but this is like another way of practicing where you're not looking at the drawing. Your purpose is not to draw it exactly. You're looking at this anatomy to kind of understand things, right? So you're studying it and seeing how you can apply it to your style, and you're playing with it, you're experimenting, you're breaking the rules here and there, but understanding that foundation. So again, it's like understanding the rules, knowing the rules before you can break them. Tip 4 would be repetition. So that's like drawing over and over, and even if you're drawing the same thing, it's like drawing the same thing over and over, but with a purpose. So sometimes it might seem tedious to draw, say, the same face from the same angle over and over again. I recommend you do those things, and in the future tip, I'll explain how that also helps and the purpose with that. But here, I'm talking more about with a purpose. Say you're practicing not just how to draw a human face, but say to draw a human face from different angles, right? So you're getting comfortable in that zone, where you start to learn to make your artwork a little more dynamic, where the viewer or the camera is really close to the character or further away, or doing certain things from certain angles that even angles that a real camera wouldn't be able to capture, where you kind of exercise your mind and you're kind of drawing. And again, the overlap here is experimenting, but you're like drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing, and these things sometimes subconsciously improve your artwork. So you can try it one day where you draw something, and make sure you're like relaxed and everything, and maybe few minutes later you draw the same thing again. And usually, if you are really putting your effort into it, each time you draw the same thing again, you're usually faster. The artwork is usually, unless don't rush it. If just the purpose is for you to improve through practicing. And for me, in my case, when I draw the same thing over and over again, if I draw a character and maybe I didn't like how the character came out, and I draw the character again, my mind has already analyzed what I didn't like with the previous iteration, and the new iteration it usually comes out much better, especially if I'm drawing things like characters. Not so much maybe logos sometimes, because you're usually coming up with different ideas. But if you're drawing the same character, right, you've analyzed what worked and what didn't work the first time. Moving forward, it's usually better, and your speed and everything you're doing kind of improves. So speed is another thing you want to improve. Which brings me to tip 5, is sometimes you might want to time yourself. So during this repetition phase, maybe if you're drawing the same thing, and it's not like where you're drawing a character from different angles, maybe you're drawing the same character from the same angle, but you're trying to improve your speed, because once you improve your speed, it sometimes also improves your confidence. So you draw it to the best of your abilities when you time yourself, and you try to beat your time each time, but also with the goal, but the main goal is to to have a better drawing each time with a shorter duration. Tip 6 would be trial and error, experimentation. I think again those things overlap, and it kind of applies to everything. Don't be afraid to experiment. I've done this a lot in my videos where I tell you there's so many ways to do one thing. There isn't one way to draw anime eyes. It's anime eyes. The artist who created that character has a style which is different from every other anime or manga artist, and you can come up with your own style. You are allowed to. You don't have to conform to anything. Your characters don't have to look a certain way. You have creative freedom and liberties. So drawing anime eyes, there's so many ways to do it. So you can, it's one of those things where you can practice with trial and error, where you kind of come up with your own style and you come up with something you like. Again, I have videos talking about developing a style or defining a style or just improving your art, which you can find. They're everywhere, and I have them linked, and they'll also be in the YouTube cards. Tip 7, confidence. Worry not, for you are just practicing. Nothing's final. You have your eraser, trusty eraser by the side. If anything doesn't work, you clean it up. It's one thing I always say is to learn to criticize yourself honestly. So you draw, you find your errors, you erase it, and you fix them. So it's like training. You train yourself to be able to analyze your work and immediately find what's wrong with it. 8, again, like I said, it will be to do these exercises. It's just exercising, training. Sometimes you can have certain goals, certain things you want to do each day. Like, for instance, I used to have my background when I drew backgrounds in my comics. I wanted them to be more detailed. I wanted them to feel more like. So, for example, I had issues, minor issues, drawing backgrounds in my comics. And over time, I drew like real buildings and just taking little tidbits from real architecture and seeing what made them work. And architecture from like unrealistic places, alternate universes, architecture from like other artists, and trying to figure out what made them work, why they looked the way they did, and they looked so legit and mine didn't. And I just kept working on that and kept practicing, taking little tidbits here and there, also experimenting, coming up with new things, new innovations, being innovative, and doing things in my own way, and implementing all of that into my comic. And over time, hopefully, people share the same sentiment, where reading the book from like the first chapter to like now, the backgrounds are much better. 9 would be to improve. Again, I have a video on that that goes into a whole lot more detail, and I think it speaks for itself. Like I said, it's kind of like one of those things where you look at your art, you find out what a problem is, you train yourself to be very analytical, if that's the correct word, and you fix things that you see, or you repeat, like tip 4, you draw over and over again and make sure that your new drawing is better than the previous, or a new sketch, or whatever. And 10, I say, would be to be patient. Most of your favorite artists did not learn to draw in a year. Didn't become dope, super dope in a year. These things take time, not the same time for everybody. So who knows? Maybe for you it'll take a week, but if it doesn't, there's a reason. It takes time, and you just have to be patient. So those are all the 10 tips I have for people who want to practice properly, or any tips I have for you to improve your artwork through practicing, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like this video, leave a comment if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe. All these things really help a great deal, help this channel, help this video. That's it, guys. So I'm Manga, and I'm out.